Hello there. Among animation fans, Don Bluth tends to fall into one of two categories. Some find him to be a legend who succeeded in making charming and timeless films after setting off on his own, while others think he is a generic director who never rose above competence and is a pale imitation of Walt Disney. I'm in the latter group. I recently watched and revisited all of Don Bluth's theatrical features and only liked 3 of them. So today I'm going to count down my favorites of his directorial efforts, or rather just the 3 I like, and my least favorite Don Bluth films. So this video ends on a somewhat positive note. I'm going to start with the least favorite. Rock-A-Doodle. Inspired by a play about a rooster who thought his crowing made the sun come up, this was, interestingly enough, originally pitched to Walt Disney way back when, but he ultimately rejected it. Don Bluth then got his hands on the tale of Chanticleer, and the result is a mess. The biggest problem is Chanticleer is surprisingly delegated to being a supporting character, as the focus is mainly on an annoying little boy with trite dialogue and zero dimensionality. The story is all over the place, and the film seems confused about its morals, and we also partake in a bunch of irritating chase scenes. The villain, the Grand Duke of Owls, is not very threatening, though Christopher Plummer gives it a game try. The songs are utterly forgettable and add nothing to the story. Despite being about a singing rooster, they feel shockingly unnecessary. To its credit, the animation is quite good, and I like the villain's sidekick, who provided the rare enjoyment I got out of it. But to me, this is an example of a bad children's film. Not a family film, which can be enjoyed by everyone. I thought there was nothing here for an older audience, and even children might be bored by the hijinks here. Thumbelina. Disney gets frequently criticized for changing around classic stories too much, but there's a reason they do that, as they understand things need to be modified to work as an animated feature. Thumbelina is proof that sometimes removing or adding elements to an adaptation is a necessity. The original Hans Christian Andersen tale of the tiny girl who gets courted about by middle-aged suitors may work in a storybook, but when translated to a full-length animated film, it comes off as very creepy. Thumbelina herself, meanwhile, comes off as very whiny, with little personality, made even more surprising since she is played by Jodie Benson, the voice of Ariel. In an age when Disney was starting to have more active female heroines, Bluth really took a step backwards with this film, although her prince is no better. The Barry Manilow songs are very trite too, and the attempts to integrate computer animation is jarring even by 1994 standards. It also has one of my major issues with Bluth, how he designs humans. In all of his films with prominent human characters, they are given a pseudo-realistic look, and I think the result doesn't entirely work. It gives off a very uncanny valley vibe, not unlike Robert Zemeckis' motion capture productions. In trying to give them a natural look, they end up looking fake. Thumbelina tries so much to copy from the Disney formula, but I think it does it to embarrassing effect with its one-dimensional characters and very icky storyline. And my least favorite Don Bluth film is, hold on, I need a moment. Okay. Here we go. A Troll in Central Park. I not only consider this to be my least favorite of Bluth's works, I also consider this to be one of the worst animated films I've ever laid eyes on. I think Bluth's weakest tendency is when he tries to be cutesy and sweet and sentimental, and this movie is overloaded with that. It pounds the audience over the head with its message, and it's just one nauseating scene after another, not helped by the dreadful songs and the main character, Stanley the Troll. I think the only ounce of enjoyment I got out of this movie is when he's turned to stone. Sadly, he came out of that state by film's end. The character designs are ugly, and even the animation is not even a cut above typical Saturday morning cartoons, hardly worthy of theatrical consumption. However, the part that really gets my goat about A Troll in Central Park is how condescending it is. There's no doubt this is a children's film rather than a family film, because there's nothing here for adults. But even when I was an easily impressed youngster, I was insulted by this tripe. To me, this is the equivalent of Dora the Explorer or Barney the Dinosaur, where it seems to think putting happy smiles and simplistic characters on screen will entertain the audience, but instead seems to talk down to them. I cannot stand products like that, and A Troll in Central Park is definitely one of the biggest examples. With that out of the way, here are my favorite Don Bluth films. Or more appropriately, my only favorite Don Bluth films. The Land Before Time. This film certainly shows one of his strengths, which is his ability at creating a dark atmosphere. You really get the sense of danger in the prehistoric period depicted in the film, and Sharptooth, the Tyrannosaurus Rex, is certainly the most threatening villain to appear in a Bluth film. Adding to the atmosphere presented in the film is the strong score by James Horner, and the end credits song, with vocals by Diana Ross, is excellent. The animation is also some of the best work Bluth has done, and I especially admire his background art. I also like the connection between the child dinosaurs. None of them feel like unnecessary additions to the journey, and their dialogue has a timeless feel to it, with the script never resorting to hip phrases that pander to the young demographic. With that said, I do find its more cutesy moments are the usual Bluth schmaltziness, and the structure of the film does remind me too much of the superior Bambi. The film is also saddled with a pointless narration that just explains what's happening on screen. Otherwise, this is a solid entry in his filmography that provides a satisfying experience, even if not on the same level as, say, the Rite of Spring segment in Fantasia. The Secret of NIMH. This placement may surprise people, since I know plenty not only rank this as their favorite Bluth film, but one of the greatest animated films ever made. I do not feel that way. I've watched it a number of times, always hoping this is the viewing where I love it, but I always end up just liking it. As I said regarding Land Before Time, I think Bluth does a great job of presenting the right dark atmosphere for the project. I find the ideas it presents of how chemical experimentation affects the rats of NIMH and how they develop the society are quite interesting, as their increased intelligence also changes their thought process about the outside world. Mrs. Brisby is a good lead, nicely voiced by Elizabeth Hartman, as you feel her determination to save her son. Jerry Goldsmith's score adds a further punch to the film, with Paul Williams' Flying Dreams serving as a touching end credit song. However, I do think The Secret of NIMH takes a while to get going, as I don't care much for the scenes of Brisby's children, and I'm sorry to say, Jeremy the Crow annoys me, and he really doesn't have that much influence on the plot, to the point where he could have been cut out, and it would have improved things. I think Dom DeLuise was a very funny actor, and yet I don't care for his performances in Don Bluth's films. I also find Jenner to be the typical power-hungry villain with little dimensions. Otherwise, The Secret of NIMH does work in creating the right atmospheric vibe, and a solid debut feature for Bluth. And my favorite Don Bluth film is An American Tail. You know how I said earlier that I don't care for when Bluth goes all cutesy and sentimental? Well, this is the exception. The heartwarming story of a little Jewish mouse in search of his family definitely hits the sweet spot, and it's hard not to root for Fievel to achieve his goal, and it's an incredibly happy moment when he reunites with his parents and sister. The songs are fantastic, with Somewhere Out There being the standout, perfectly capturing the theme of the film that even through the harshest times, it's important to keep a positive outlook, and things will eventually turn out for the best. The animation has the right old photograph feel to it, especially in the backgrounds. The film does tend to run too short, and admittedly I think the villain of Warren T. Ract is kind of weak. The dangers Fievel encounters while wandering through New York are antagonistic enough. Now I should point out that the reason I think the sentimentality works in this film and not Bluth's other films is because of the contributions of its executive producer, Steven Spielberg. The heartwarming moments feel so much like Spielberg's fingerprints, and since this was his first animated production, he wanted to be very involved in the process, and you can tell. Even the character Fievel was based on his grandfather, and with a couple of scenes being inspired by the stories he would tell him. Fievel was also his grandfather's Yiddish name. That's how personal An American Tail was to Spielberg. I think Spielberg was able to bring his ability at creating heartwarming stories and successfully combine it with Bluth's strong animation and penchant for darkness. The split from Spielberg post-Land Before Time enforces this, as Bluth's later attempts at sentiment lack the subtle magic of not only An American Tail, but the man's directorial works like E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Empire of the Sun, and Hook. It was working alongside one of today's best filmmakers that led Don Bluth to creating my favorite of his films, and I stand by that separating from Amblin was not a good idea on his part. As for Bluth's other films, I think Titanic actually has some interesting ideas and fun space battles, but is weighed down by the okay story execution and undeveloped characters. Despite some excellent Broadway caliber musical numbers and some of the best animation in a Bluth film, I feel Anastasia suffers from its weak and occasionally unnecessary characters and an average attempt at aping the Disney formula. The Pamela Penguin is harmless enough, but its songs are forgettable and its story is rather mediocre in its execution. And Old Dogs Go to Heaven actually came rather close to making my least favorite list. Sorry. So, as you can see, despite liking his first 3 animated features, I feel Don Bluth's films took a major dip in quality shortly afterwards, and as a whole, I'm not wildly impressed by his filmography. I do understand why his work is so admired by plenty of people, but his movies just don't do much for me. See you next time.